2 Czech violins were displayed by the guest, each with an intriguing backstory. The first violin was crafted by Ferdinandus Homolka, a renowned violin maker. It was dated 1873 and was in excellent condition.
And he was known as the Stradivarius of Prague.
Oh, yes.
So he has very high reputation. It's a beautiful violin and it's in great condition.
The other violin was made by Julius Hubicka in 1927. While the maker's name was less well known, it was still considered a fine instrument. Regarding the bows, the appraiser pointed out several that were noteworthy. The first bow was made by James Tubb, a famous English bow maker, dating from around 1880. In their current condition, the suggested retail value for both violins and the bows was estimated to be.
Today, a Homolka like this has a retail price between $20,000 and $25,000. The Hubecka, around $12,000. The Tubbs bow, the button is not original. It detracts a little bit from this price, but even at that would have a retail value around $13,000. This next bow is a German bow, a good quality German bow, around $1,500. This bow right here, the hill bow, unfortunately it's not original in all its parts. Frog has been replaced on it, so that cuts the value in half. Also, we can't see it on this side, but there's a repair to the head of the bow, so it greatly affects the value of the bow. But even at that would have a value of around $1,500. The other bows are inconsequential of $100 or so each.
Wow. Wow. Thanks very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, that's really good. That's great.
The guest's family heirloom included a violin, likely dating from the 1930s or early 1940s. The instrument bore a label reading Jean-Laurent Clément, a violin dealer who had moved from Mirecourt to Paris in 1810. Although Clément was not a violin maker himself, he had employed top craftsmen of the time, including the renowned Georges Chanot. Based on the high-quality craftsmanship, the appraiser believed the violin may have been made by Chanot around 1820. The violin was made of traditional materials, spruce for the top and maple for the back, ribs, neck, and peg box. Additionally, the appraiser also highlighted the violin's alligator leather case, which had been well preserved. Despite a visible crack, the violin's retail value was determined to be.
A violin like this, in the retail market, would sell for at least $30,000 to $40,000.
Oh, wow. Wow!
This violin belonged to the guest's great-aunt Marie, a violinist from the Cincinnati area in Ohio. A bill was presented, showing that the item was sold in 1921 as a Camillus Camilli violin for $1,000. The violin was of very fine workmanship, exhibiting features typical of the Mantuan school, which was heavily influenced by Cremona, home of Stradivari. The back of the violin was made of oppio wood, a native northern Italian wood with a distinct curl pattern. It had tool marks and texture consistent with fine Italian craftsmanship. Despite its high quality, the piece was a fine forgery, not an original Camilli. The bow was French and crafted by Claude Thomasin, a renowned 20th century maker. The value suggested for the violin and bow was.
But this violin, being a very fine fake, still has some value. And that value at an auction sale is between $6,000 to $8,000. The bow is about the same as the value of the violin, and that is about $6,000 to $8,000.
The guest recounted discovering a violin at a friend's antique shop during the 1970s. The appraiser confirmed that the instrument was a genuine 1671 piece made by Van Munster, retaining its original label. The violin featured serpentine-shaped F-holes with tiny lobes, a hallmark of Dutch craftsmanship. The decorative inlay around the edge of the instrument was made from baleen whalebone laminates, typical of Dutch violins. Additionally, the violin exhibited classic red Dutch varnish, and the scroll's design included a small volute to top a larger head. These elements collectively confirmed it as a classic 17th century Amsterdam work, heavily influenced by Italian makers. Given current market trends, the violin value decided was.
I think on the market today, this one in this condition, I'm going to say between $6,000 and $8,000.
A lot more than I thought.
A guest brought a violin that had been in their family for decades. The appraiser began by pointing out a striking feature. The carved lion's head on the peg box, a rare and unique touch. The back of the violin was made from bird's eye maple, a type of wood typical of a certain period in German violin making. Despite its age and use, the instrument was in beautiful, pure condition. The violin bore 3 labels, but only the third, hidden inside, revealed its true origin. This label showed the actual maker as Matthias Hornsteiner from Mittenwald in 1781.
And the Hornsteiner family were the kings. They were the earliest of the makers. Well, there were two families, the Klotzes and the Hornsteiners. And the Hornsteiners were really highly regarded. And Matthias Hornsteiner II is considered to be the top-notch member of the Hornsteiner family. And so the violin is absolutely pure.
The appraiser was thrilled by the discovery and noted the violin's originality and excellent condition. Given the violin's pristine condition and authenticity, the conservative value estimated was $20,000.
Oh my, really? Really?
That's right, and that's conservative.
It's going to stay in the family and be a masterpiece for our family for a long time. It's just a wonderful piece. We knew it was. We just had no idea how great it was.
The guests recounted finding a violin during a road trip in Montana while on a fishing trip with their parents. The violin showed significant natural wear in the varnish, a desirable sign of authenticity and age. It was identified as an American instrument, made in the workshop of George Gamunda and Son in New York, dated 1901. George Gamunda Sr. was considered one of the finest American violin makers of the 19th and early 20th centuries.
His violins are extremely popular today with collectors and musicians, and for very good reason. The work on these violins is exquisite.
The violin was crafted from American wood and featured a beautiful thick oil varnish, known for its richness and long drying time. The carving and woodworking were exceptional, and the instrument remained in excellent condition. Given its desirability, the suggested auction value was.
Well, the auction value of a Gamunda and Son violin of this level is between $10,000 and $15,000 at auction.
Nice. Good buy for $1.
Are you going to let her play it now?
I doubt it. Put it back away.
An interesting instrument was displayed that had belonged to the guest's great-grandfather. The item was identified as a hardanger fiddle, a traditional Norwegian stringed instrument similar to a violin. These instruments were visually striking and held strong regional significance. The appraiser highlighted the key features of this particular fiddle.
Your hardanger fiddle is made from native Norway woods. The top is of spruce. The back is of black alder. The ribs are of maple. The pegs are almost always made of apple or pear, and that's the case here as well.
The fiddle had a total of 8 strings, 4 that were played directly over the fingerboard, and 4 sympathetic understrings that resonated with the music but were not played. The fingerboard and edges were adorned with decorative inlays made of mother of pearl and bone.
So notice on top we've got the lion's head. And the lion's head is really important because it was the national symbol of Norway. Your instrument is missing some of its teeth and it's missing its tongue.
There was some damage, including a crack on the back, and the instrument required restoration. Despite the condition, the appraiser stated that the hardanger fiddle had a retail value of.
As is, it has a retail value of $8,000 to $9,000.
Oh my goodness, wow.
A viola was presented at the show that originally belonged to the guest's grandfather. The viola was made by Treffel Gervais, a relatively rare maker from Canada, born in 1863. The label on the viola confirmed it was made by Gervais in Boston and was labeled as No. 1 viola. The appraiser described the viola's construction as beautiful, with a typical maple back and sides, a spruce top, maple ribs, and an ebony fingerboard. The varnish was a rich dark red over a vibrant yellow ground, with wear marks visible on the instrument. Based on the construction and condition, the piece was estimated to have been made around 1890. Given its condition and desirability, the suggested value was.
I think that a violin by this maker might not be worth quite $10,000. Viola, a solid $10,000, and perhaps in a local violin shop, as much as $15,000, because I think that a local Boston shop would be able to capitalize on the local making.
Okay.
That being said, I've never seen one for sale. I'd also give it an insurance value of $15,000.
Very nice.
The guest had inherited 2 violins from her mother after her father's passing. Both violins had labels attached to them, but are determined to be false. The first violin with the Georges Chanot label was counterfeit and had been revarnished, which significantly decreased its value by 80%. The second violin, labelled Benoist Fleury, also had a false label. However, upon further inspection, the appraiser identified it as a violin made in London. Given these factors, the appraiser suggested a retail value for the violins of...
This violin has minimal value, $400 to $500 retail.
Okay.
It's impossible without the original varnish to know who made that violin. Now this violin, interestingly enough, has the label of Benoist Fleury. The label also is false in this violin, right? But through looking at the inside of the violin and looking at the way it was made and looking at the way it was designed, we know that this violin was made in London by one of the very, very famous makers who would have worked in the school of Fent in the 1840s or 1850s, would have a retail value in today's marketplace of at least $8,000.
Oh my goodness.
This violin belonged to the guest's aunt, who had been a Roman Catholic nun for 20 years. It was made by Anders Halvarsson of Myers Halvarsson.
He bought first quality wood and made instruments in the basement of this house, and he was extremely industrious.
Halvarsson, originally from Sweden, moved to the United States in 1923. There he worked at William Lewis & Son in Chicago under Carl Becker Sr. and Jr., renowned American violin makers. The appraiser noted the violin's high-quality craftsmanship, including a beautifully carved scroll, a one-piece flamed maple back, and an evenly applied orange varnish done by hand. The label inside read Myers Halvarsson, reflecting the understated nature of Halvarsson's work. The violin's quality and rarity made it a notable piece from a distinguished American maker of the 20th century. Considering its historical significance, the value suggested was...
I would place the value of this violin between $4,000 and $6,000.
Wow.
A very fine violin was displayed at the show. The remarkable piece was made by Charles Francis Albert, a renowned American violin maker.
And he was born in Freiburg, Germany in the 1840s, 1842 actually. Immigrated to New York in 1865 and then settled in Philadelphia a couple years later.
One of the most striking features of the violin was its carved scroll, depicting a detailed figure of a woman's head. The back of the instrument featured purfled arabesques, a design element used to replicate the 16th century Brescian Italian style. These details showcased Albert's skill and his awareness of European violin-making trends. The violin included the original medal from the 1878 Paris Exposition, with Albert's name inscribed on it. Given desirability, this particular violin could have sold for...
If you were to see it for sale in a shop, it would bring somewhere in the $3,000 range, perhaps $3,500.
That's great.
This violin came with a unique and colorful origin story shared by the guest. The instrument bore a label for Gaspard Duifo-Prugar, a name famously tied to a 19th century violin-making myth. The appraiser clarified that the story was not true, and Duifo-Prugar never made violins.
Duifo-Prugar was the teacher of Gasparo da Salo, who's thought usually as the first violin maker. Therefore, this must be the world's first violin. In fact, Duifo-Prugar never made a violin. He lived before the violin was invented.
Despite the fictional narrative, the style of violin became highly sought after across Europe. This particular violin had features typical of the earlier models, suggesting it was made between 1840 and 1860. It included decorative elements such as a carved head, allegedly representing Duifo-Prugar, and artwork claimed to depict the gates of Prague. Despite the historical inaccuracies, the violin was considered visually and culturally fascinating. Given the historical insights, the value suggested for the beautiful piece was...
If it's Derazé outside of the Violin shop, there would also be an equally hard-to-find mark, about $5,000 to $7,000. I really think that it is one of those.
The guest's grandfather had owned the violin since 1927, when he was 3 years old. The instrument was considered historically and musically significant. It featured a label marked Eugen Meinl, which clearly dated it to 1928 and matched the grandfather's timeline. The appraiser pointed out that the violin was not currently in playable condition. The most notable issue was a missing portion of the back of the violin, specifically a section of the peg box. The appraiser suspected it was carved off to avoid interfering with finger placement while playing. Despite the damage, the value suggested for the violin was...
This violin, as it is right now, in a retail environment, would be worth $5,000.
Like that?
Right, as is. Now, if you fixed it up into playing condition, it would be worth probably closer to $6,000.
The guest presented a family heirloom violin that had belonged to their uncle on her mother's side. The violin was in neglected condition, covered in dust, missing a bridge, and had loose strings. Despite this, the appraiser was intrigued by the label inside. To verify the authenticity of the label, the appraiser examined the violin's outline, F-holes, and varnish. It was revealed that it had been made by Michael Andreas Partl, one of the finest makers in Vienna. The violin's worn varnish and 2 centuries of aging further confirmed its authenticity. In its current state, the violin held a retail value of approximately.
And as is, in the retail world, in a violin shop, this is a violin that has a value of probably $5,000.
That's great. And lots of sentimental value as well.
A ukulele, also known as a harp violin, was displayed at the show. The appraiser shared the history tied to this exquisite instrument. Ukuleles were mass-produced and sold by the International Music Company in New Jersey. They were commonly distributed across the US via mail order and door-to-door sales during 1925. At the time, the ukulele retailed for $35, but it proved to be a very difficult instrument to play. This particular ukulele was notable because it included all of its original components: the bow, instruction manual, tuning key, and music stand. The instrument represented a significant piece of American music merchandising history. Despite this, its monetary value was estimated to be low.
Value today, $50 at best, so a little bit better than the $35 it might have cost day one.